Story 1. The house at the end of the street. Have you ever walked down that deserted street in your town? The one everyone seems to avoid, where the streetlights flicker and the wind seems to whisper secrets you don't want to hear. Well, at the end of that street, there's a house that stands like a shadow forgotten by time. The windows are always shut, paint is peeling, and the garden dead. But what no one knows is that something sinister lurks behind those old walls. It all began many years ago when a family moved in. They were said to be quiet, reserved people, the kind you notice for their lack of warmth and excitement. The husband was a serious man, the wife always had her eyes downcast, and the daughter, well, she was an odd child. The neighbors kept their distance, but everyone noticed the changes in the house. The windows once letting light in, covered by heavy dark curtains. No one came in, no one went out. Then, one day, the screams began. High-pitched, desperate screams that came from the depths of the house. The neighbors heard them. No one had the courage to investigate. They called the police, but when the officers arrived, they found the house empty, completely abandoned. Family vanished, as if they had never existed. Over time, stories began to circulate. They said the house was cursed, that anyone who tried to enter would never be the same. Bodies were found around the house, all with expressions of pure terror on their faces. But no one knew what really happened inside. Then came that night. A group of teenagers, defying the legends, decided to break into the house. Armed with flashlights and courage, they opened the creaking door and stepped into the dark hallway. The air was heavy, and each step echoed like a warning. They climbed the stairs, entered the rooms, and finally reached the basement. Down there, the air was even denser, almost palpable. The flashlight beams flickered, and the whispers began. Indistinct voices, but filled with despair. And then they saw it. In the center of the basement, a figure was hunched over a circle of ancient symbols. When the figure raised its head, they realized it wasn't human. Its eyes, black as the void, seemed to pull them into an endless abyss. One of the teenagers screamed and ran, but the others weren't so lucky. They were never found, but those who escaped told stories no one dares repeat. The house has remained empty ever since, except for whatever still resides within, waiting for another brave or foolish soul to enter. And you? Would you have the courage to face the house at the end of the street? To hear the screams echoing in the night and ignore the whispers calling your name? Maybe it's best to avoid that part of town. After all, some doors were never meant to be opened. Story 2. The Stranger in the Mirror. Have you ever heard that urban legend? The one that says if you stand in front of a mirror in the dark and whisper certain words, something or someone might appear? Most people laugh it off as nonsense, a tale to scare children, but some know the truth. Some have experienced firsthand what it means to see the impossible reflected back at them. This is the story of a group of friends who didn't believe in the supernatural. Until it was too late. It was an ordinary night, nothing special. 4 friends had gathered at one of their houses, ready to spend another boring night playing video games and chatting about life. But, as it often happens in these situations, boredom led to curiosity. One of them, Lucas, suggested they try something different, something no one else would have the guts to do. The idea was simple. Turn off the lights, light a candle in front of the mirror, and summon whatever might be on the other side. They laughed, mocking the idea. But deep down, there was unease, that feeling that they were about to cross an invisible line. Even so, they all agreed. It was just a game, right? Nothing could really happen. They turned off the lights, and the room was swallowed by heavy darkness. The only light came from the candle, flickering, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The large old mirror reflected the room in a distorted way, as if it were alive, waiting. Lucas, with a nervous smile, approached the mirror and began to recite the words. At first, nothing happened. The silence was profound, almost deafening. But then, something changed. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and the candle's flame wavered as if an invisible wind had blown through. That's when they saw it. In the mirror, behind Lucas, a figure began to take shape. At first, it was just a shadow, but as the seconds passed, it became clearer. It was a man, or something that resembled a man. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were empty. black holes that seemed to suck in all the light around them. Lucas stopped reciting, the smile frozen on his face. He couldn't see what the others saw, but he felt the heavy air, as if something was watching him, very, very closely. The other friends were paralyzed, their eyes fixed on the mirror, where the stranger began to move, getting closer and closer to Lucas. What happened next is hard to describe. Candle went out, plunging the room into total darkness. There was a sound, a whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. And then, a scream. A scream that tore through the silence of the night and froze the blood of everyone present. When the lights finally came on, Lucas was on the floor, trembling, his face pale and his eyes wide, locked on the mirror. The friends rushed to help him, but he wouldn't respond. Only muttering over and over, "He's still there, he's still there." The mirror? Well, they covered it with a sheet, trying to forget what they had seen. But what they don't know is that some things can't be forgotten, that once you look to the other side looks back. And sometimes what you see doesn't want to leave. Some images never fade. Story 3. The Scream in the Forest. Imagine being surrounded by a dense forest, where the trees close in around you like silent sentinels, and the darkness is so deep it feels like the world ends beyond the beam of your flashlight. Now imagine you're there with your friends, laughing and telling stories around a campfire, convinced that nothing can touch you. But what if I told you that on that night, in that place, the silence wasn't just silence? It was a warning. It was supposed to be a fun night. 4 friends decided to camp in a forest that, according to local stories, held more than just ancient trees and forgotten trails. They said people had disappeared there. Those warnings seemed like nothing more than legends meant to scare tourists. And like any group of brave teenagers, they ignored the warnings and set up camp in the heart of the forest. The night began peacefully. Campfire crackled, lighting up their relaxed faces as they shared jokes and plans for the future. But as the hours passed, the wind began to blow with an unsettling intensity, whispering through the leaves as if trying to say something. Then came the first sound. A distant scream, floating in the air, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. They looked at each other, laughing nervously, convinced it was just some nocturnal animal, or maybe even one of them playing a prank. The scream didn't stop, and it was getting closer, louder, sharper, more desperate. It was the sound of someone or something in absolute panic. And as it got closer, the laughter faded, giving way to fear. A primal fear, the kind that comes when your body knows something is terribly wrong, but your mind refuses to accept it. The campfire, once a point of comfort, now seemed small, incapable of protecting against whatever was moving in the shadows. The friends decided it was time to retreat to the tents, lock themselves in, and wait for the morning. But as soon as they took the first step, the scream changed. Now it was different, closer, more real, as if it were coming from inside the forest itself. They froze, hearts racing, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the reach of the light. And then, among the trees, they saw it. A pale, almost translucent figure moving slowly toward them. Its movements were erratic, as if it were being pulled by an invisible force. And from its mouth, without moving its lips, the scream continued, echoing through the night. It was panic that made them run. But what they didn't know was that in the forest, running isn't always the best choice. Because that thing, that entity, seemed to feed on fear. The faster they ran, the louder the scream became, reverberating in their skulls, making them trip, fall, and lose each other. The next morning, only one of them emerged from the forest. Dirty, scratched, and with glazed eyes, he couldn't speak, couldn't explain what had happened. All he repeated as rescuers tried to calm him was, "The scream, it never stops, it never stops. The forest, it's still there, as serene as ever." But if you listen carefully, on some nights, when the wind is just right, you might hear a scream in the distance. And who knows, maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe it's something still hunting, waiting for someone brave enough to get lost in the darkness. So, if you ever decide to go camping, remember, the forest has its own secret, and some screams should never be heard. Story 4. The Night Visitor. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was watching you? That unsettling sensation that makes your skin crawl and your heart race? For most people, it's just a figment of the imagination. a nightmare that dissipates once the lights are turned on. But for a young woman named Anna, that sensation became a reality that consumed her night after night. It all started innocently enough. Anna was a university student, living alone in a small apartment. Life went on as usual until one night, around 3 a.m., she suddenly woke up. Her room was shrouded in an almost suffocating darkness. There was something different, present, something she couldn't explain. Looking around, her eyes stopped at the window, and that's when she saw it. A tall, slender figure stood outside, motionless, just watching. Even in the dim streetlight, she could see that the face was a blurred blotch with no defined features, but the eyes shone with a disturbing intensity. She was paralyzed, fear pinning her to the bed, unable to move or scream. And then, the figure vanished, disappearing into the night. Anna tried to rationalize it, telling herself it was just a dream, that the darkness had played a trick on her tired mind. But the next night, it happened again, and the next. Each time the figure was there, just watching, as if waiting for something, as if studying her. She began telling her friends, but no one believed her. They laughed, saying she was overreacting, that it was just the pressure of her studies messing with her head. But Anna knew something was wrong. She started avoiding sleep, fearing the moment the night visitor would appear once more. One night, she decided to confront her fear. Armed with a kitchen knife, she waited. The clock struck 3 a.m. when once again the figure appeared. But this time, something was different. The shadow was closer, more defined. She could see the contours of the body, almost imperceptible movement of the chest, as if it were breathing. Gathering all the courage she had, Anna got out of bed and marched towards the window. But as soon as she got close, the figure simply dissolved into the darkness. Confused, she opened the window, looking out at the empty street. There was nothing, just the silence of the night and the cold wind. Relieved, she closed the window and went back to bed, certain that she had ended the nightmare. But what she didn't know was that the real horror was just beginning. That same night, just before dawn, Anna woke up again. This time, there was no warning, no figure at the window, just a cold presence beside her bed. Trembling, she turned her head and found the visitor, inside her room. He was there, standing just inches away, with those shining eyes locked on hers. And then he smiled, grotesque, impossible smile that stretched from ear to ear, revealing a mouth full of sharp teeth. Before she could react, she felt a hand as cold as death on her shoulder, and the darkness swallowed her whole. The next morning, Anna's neighbors found her apartment empty. There were no signs of a struggle, nothing out of place, just a half-open window gently swaying in the wind. Anna was never seen again. Some say she ran away, driven mad by fear. Others believe the night visitor took her to a place where daylight never comes. And you? Do you dare look out your window at night? Because sometimes, when the darkness is deep and the silence is absolute, something might be looking back. And if you look long enough, you might see what you shouldn't, or be seen by what's watching you. Would you rather sleep peacefully, ignoring the dangers hidden in the dark, or have the courage to know what really happens while you're vulnerable? The choice is yours, but be prepared for the consequence. If you've made it this far, you already know that fear can be as fascinating as it is terrifying. These stories are just the beginning. If you enjoy that spine-chilling sensation and want more dark, mysterious, and disturbing tales, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, terror is our ally, and with each new video, you'll be taken to explore the darkest corners of the imagination. But be careful. You never know what might be watching you from the other side of the screen. See you in the next story, if you have the courage.